Hi friends, welcome. If you are new around here, my name's Allie Chambers. I'm a wedding photographer based here in Nashville, Tennessee, and today we are talking about how to hire a wedding photographer. Today we're going to be talking about the different questions and ways that you can evaluate a wedding photographer when you are looking to hire someone. Now, you can watch this as someone who maybe is looking to hire your wedding photographer, or you can watch this as somebody who is a wedding photographer or pursuing wedding photography. A lot of these things that we're going to be talking about are ways that I evaluate second shooters, and a lot of the ways that I evaluate referrals whenever I'm not available for a wedding or my team isn't available for a wedding. A little disclaimer and preface to this video is that everyone runs their photography business differently. As I've mentioned before in previous videos, photography is a spectrum. Not all photographers are going to fit into these categories that I'm discussing. And when it comes to these evaluations, I'm not here to shame anyone's budgets, businesses, or styles. I'm here to give you a perspective as an experienced wedding photographer so that you can have some things that you can think through whenever you are looking to hire someone. This is not going to be a video of 105 questions you should ask a wedding photographer. If you are a wedding photographer, you should consider going to one of those blog posts. There are a lot of big brands out there that have written blog posts on questions that you should ask a photographer, and my advice to you would be to go through all of those and incorporate it into your frequently asked questions on your website or in your pricing guide, because these are questions that people are going to want to have answers to. And to save time in this video, to save time in your business, you might as well just go ahead and get all of those questions answered on the front end. A lot of really basic questions that you wouldn't want to necessarily waste time covering during a phone call when you're wanting to connect with a client. So why do I make this video? I am making this for the people who are looking to hire a wedding photographer so that you're taking time to evaluate a photographer's work and set realistic expectations for what you want in a wedding day, what you can afford, and what you're going to get. Now, I am making a very generic chart on ways that I would describe different wedding photographers. Like I said, this is extremely generic. Not everyone's going to fit into these categories. This is not any kind of criteria that anyone else has written. This is just a way that I'm going to help you visualize some different styles of photographers that are out there. As we look vertical, we are going to start from a lower price point to a higher price point. Depending on what is considered low budget and what is considered high budget, all is going to depend on where you live and a lot of other environmental factors. When we're looking at the bottom, we are going from well experienced to beginner. Let's go ahead and start with the leisure photographer. Now, why do I call this leisure? When you see somebody who may be lower budgeted than anybody else that you've inquired with and their pricing seems really relatively low, but you're noticing that they have a lot of experience, there can be a lot of different reasons for why that is. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should have any red flags. It might just mean that this is someone who's really comfortable with shooting a lot of volumes of wedding. And I know that doesn't necessarily mean leisure, but that's one type of person that could be fitting into this category. This could also be somebody who doesn't really want to take on a whole lot of weddings. They do other styles of photography, but because they've had so much experience, they're not really sure what to charge anymore. Maybe they only do it for family and friends. I think that this type is a little bit more rare when it comes to having a very well-experienced photographer for a very low budget. Let's move into hobbyist. This is someone who is going to be a little bit lower budget, and this is going to be somebody who might be a little bit more on the beginner scale. I always want to preface to people that if you are going with somebody who is a beginner photographer, you cannot have your expectations set for here thinking that you are getting a well-experienced, high-quality, high-valued photographer. It does not mean that they're not going to do a great job. I have been the beginner photographer before. I have probably missed things that I would not miss now in my career, but that is the risk that you are running. And if you are not concerned, then this may be a great fit for you. Quality is all relative to the person who is booking it. This could also be somebody who maybe moved from a different style of photography into wedding photography. Maybe they were a fashion photographer and now they're wanting to get into weddings. Now we're going to move into what I would consider the quick starter. This is someone who is not very experienced with weddings, but has a very high price tag. This can be for a number of reasons. If they have a really large social following and they came to a lot of social recognition very quickly, and now they are having really high demand for their photography, but they don't have a lot of experience. There's not anything wrong with the quick starter, but it is something that you want to be aware of, that maybe they don't have as much experience with weddings, and that's just something that you're getting into. And then we have our last but not least, our full-time photographer that is high valued and well experienced. Now, a lot of different questions that you're going to ask is going to depend on how to figure out which one you need and which one you're getting and which one's a great fit for you. Before we start getting into questions that you need to ask your wedding photographer, I want to start with questions that you need to ask yourself. Evaluate, what is my value in photography? And when I say value, it's not necessarily monetized, it's emotional. What parts are important to you? And another thing to consider is, what is your budget? If you are someone who might be working with a little bit smaller or mid-sized budget, I usually recommend to people pick like 3 to 5 things that really mean a lot to you. Because if you don't have the budget that can get you everything, you need to figure out what is most important so that you can have realistic expectations whenever you are hiring someone and you are not disappointed when you either have a bad experience on your wedding day or you get your photos back and you're not super thrilled with them. And for my friends working on a budget, when I say pick 3 to 5 things, these are just things that are important to you. For example, it could be quality personality, editorial editing, and outstanding couples portraits. Figuring out your biggest priorities is going to help you a ton whenever it comes to figuring out who is the right pick for you. If you are on a really tight budget or a mid-sized budget or a budget that doesn't allot for a lot of photography, that is completely okay, and there is a photographer out there for you. Some practical questions that might be worth your time asking a photographer. Photographers, if you are watching this, please add some of these questions into your frequently asked questions section. How much direction do you give? If you are somebody who's looking for a more candid documentary journalistic style, or if you are someone who's looking for a little bit more editorial, or if you're wanting someone who's just not going to make you feel awkward in front of the camera, you want to know what exactly you want so that you can figure out who's a good fit for you. Other practical questions that are important to ask: do you have insurance? If you're working with a hobbyist, someone who does it leisurely, someone who's a little bit lower budget, there's a chance that they may not have insurance. These questions kind of encapsulate some things that can happen on a wedding day. Do you have a backup plan in case of an emergency? Do you have a risk management plan? What does associate coverage look like if for some reason you can't shoot my wedding? And are you in a network with other photographers? What does your backup plan look like whenever you get home from wedding to make sure that all of my photos are stored safe? All of these things are really eliminating a lot of the risk that can be involved with working with something that is so special. And yes, things happen. You could have a photographer that has all of these things figured out and then life happens. So it's worth asking some of those questions. Another question is, can I see a full gallery? There are a lot of photographers that will showcase their best and most beautiful works on their website, which is very typical and very normal. I do it too. But a full gallery will show you what the family photos look like, what the posed photos look like, what the dance floor photos look like. And sometimes we're not always so inclined to share a lot of those pictures. So it's really important to ask to see a gallery. Some lighter questions to ask is, what does your communication process look like? After I book with you, when can I expect to hear from you? What does this journey look like from, paying you a deposit if they require a deposit, all the way up until shooting the wedding day, and then after? Another question to ask is what the turnaround time is. How long can they expect to wait to get their photos back? Do you do a sneak peek? Photographers, you should have these questions and your frequently asked questions so that people can have all of this information beforehand. Questions that I don't necessarily think are make it or break it that I've seen on a lot of different blogs that are like 50 questions you should ask your wedding photographer. Questions like, what is your photo editing style? A better question to ask, if it's something that is important to you, is, do you include any spot removal or any retouching? You can ask more specific questions about their experience. What are some really hard situations that you've navigated on a wedding day and how did you deal with those? These are a lot more conversation starters rather than just listing off questions that don't really develop a lot of conversation or relationships. Now let's move into the evaluation portion of hiring a wedding photographer. What I mean by evaluation is going through their portfolio, their website, their Instagram, whatever you are looking at to try to figure out if this is the right person for you. This is how I would evaluate that. Do they have a good mix of posed and unposed photos? But you do want to make sure that if they have a lot of candids, that they also have the things that might be important to you, like posed family formals. Way too many candids and way too many unposed might also indicate that they've really shot more as a second shooter rather than a lead, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all, but I always think it's really important to have balances of both. My second evaluation is the things in their portfolio, do they look like real weddings? I love showcasing styled shoots. I think it's a really fun way to play around with different ideas that you can have for weddings and give a lot of your couples inspiration. It's also just a really fun way to get creative without the pressure of having a wedding day. Too many styled shoots in a portfolio might indicate to me that they haven't shot that many weddings yet and that they might lack experience of the actual pace of a real wedding day. Wedding day has a lot of different moving dynamics, which brings me to my next question. Do you see yourself or your wedding venue or your wedding day in the photos that you're looking at? Now, what do I mean by that? Different skin tones, different landscapes, different types of wedding aesthetics are all going to look different. And I think it's important to make sure that you see some version of what you are looking for represented in their portfolio. I've had a lot of people before show me photos that they've loved from wedding photographers or show me photos that they've loved of engagement sessions when my couples might be building a Pinterest board. The couples in the photos may not look anything like them, and the landscapes look nothing like where we'll be shooting at. Places in Colorado when we're shooting in Tennessee. So try to see if there's any styles that are similar to you so that you can know a little bit better of an idea of what your wedding day might look like. My last evaluation is, do they have different types of lighting displayed in their portfolio? I'm not someone who showcases a ton of dance floor photos, but I'll usually sprinkle in a couple just to let people know that I do know how to use my flash. I'm used to working in a lot of different lighting scenarios. If you see only golden hour, your wedding day may not have golden hour. If you see only overcast and no harsh shadows and no lighting variety, they may not know how to work with a day that's extremely bright in the morning when you're having to take all of your wedding party photos. Try to see if there's different types of lighting demonstrated in their portfolio. Now, I have a couple of questions for you. If you are a wedding photographer, what is a really good question that you feel like is left out of this that you think people should be asking more when they're hiring a wedding photographer? And if you are somebody looking for a wedding photographer, or if you are somebody who has hired a wedding photographer, I would love to know what questions you think are really important to ask as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe and stick around so that you can see new content that is released each week. And I wish you the best, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks, friends. Bye.